Hello and welcome to this episode of Therapist Talk with me, Myra Khan. And joining me today is therapist Humera Patel. Welcome, Humera.
Thank you. Hi to you. Hope you're well.
Good, thank you. Well, it's lovely that you're joining us for today's episode, and we're going to obviously hear a lot about you and the work that you do. So, would you like to introduce yourself and perhaps give a bit of context to your work then as a therapist?
Yes, so I'm Humera. I'm a counsellor and I'm in private practice. I do work with young people, I work with adults, and in terms of my approach, I'm an integrative counsellor, which means I bring in different approaches. And one of the ones I use is Islamic counselling as well.
Okay, great. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that as we kind of proceed through this chat. Because I know a lot of people are very interested and keen to learn about and know about kind of Islamic counselling. So yeah, I'll ask more about that in a moment. You mentioned then in terms of the clients you work with, you said young adults and adults. When you say young adults, what age range? So again, people watching this, they kind of know what type of clients you work with. What age range?
Mm. So I work with young people as well as adults. So then I can start from primary. So I've worked with, key stage two all the way to secondary to college. So I've worked with clients and young people from there. And then with adults, I work, from various ages. It can be older people, younger, middle age. So that's the sort of client work I do.
Great. And I think that's so useful to know because I think especially, and I'm noticing more, I think within our profession, more and more people wanting to find support for their children. And I think it's harder and I think it's getting more difficult actually to find qualified, experienced counsellors who do work with children and young people. So it's great that you're able to offer that as part of your practice.
Mm.
So straight away, there's a specialism there that you work with children and young people. And then, of course, you mentioned then working, one of your modalities is Islamic counselling. So could you say and share with us what is Islamic counselling? How does that differ to other modalities that maybe viewers have heard of? What's the difference and what does that look like then in the room?
Yeah, so with Islamic counseling, there are some similarities, however, there are some differences. And with Islamic counseling, you work with the soul. So it is working with the different states of the soul. If I were to name them, it would be, the nafs ammara to that's the lower state of the soul, and the middle one is the nafs lawama, and then, we get the nafs mutmainna, which is, the divine self, and that's what we're sort of aiming towards, and that's where you, again, it's when you have if I kind of relate it back to person-centered counseling, it's almost like it's similar to having self-actualization, which is, basically when you start knowing yourself, you know how to, work with yourself, what you need, your needs, your wants, and reach a stage which is quite content. It doesn't mean you don't have problems or you don't have issues or you're, a perfect Muslim. It just means that you know you know yourself and you know how to do things for yourself and Allah. So your source of happiness, it comes from you and Allah, which is because those two entities are permanent. Whereas, when you have um society, you have, the parts which are quite difficult, that's usually outside of yourself. So one example I always go to give to my clients is how to know where you're at is, okay, let's say you have your favorite car. Let's say you buy that car and everyone deems you as successful. However, you know, the next day everyone deems that you having that car isn't being successful. Would you still feel the same about that car, or would that sort of change? And I think it's just looking at your locus of evaluation and whether that's external or internal. And I think that's the difference between the nafs lawama and the nafs mutmainna. So I think there's similarities, but there's that difference as well.
Yeah. And I love how you describe that it's kind of working with the soul at the I was going to say at the heart of it, but at the very soul level of it, it is about working with the soul. And I suppose what the question that comes to my mind then when you say that is, I'm thinking then about clients then that come for Islamic counselling. Is that because they're wanting to work on themselves? Like, are you noticing that the clients that come for Islamic counselling, what type of issues then are they bringing? Are they coming already with an awareness that that's what they're wanting to do, which is working on the soul? Or do you find that actually you offer some kind of education around what Islamic counselling is in order for them to understand what it is that you're working with? How does it work when, essentially kind of, I suppose what I'm asking is, what are clients coming with that then means that you then go, okay, Islamic counselling is for you?
So a lot of the times when I do my assessment or I get a sort of query around the sort of work I do and they want to have a therapy, it is usually they ask me or they say that they want some sort of Islamic counselling or they want some sort of, or they've reached out to me because I have, in within my profile, I've done Islamic theology or whatever it is. And I think that's what attracts them to me. So then when I do when I do bring in, it would be along them sides. However, if sometimes I'll have clients which experience religious guilt or they experience difficulties around religion because sometimes there's a mixture of Islam and culture. And at times I can see that they're sort of beating themselves up or they're sort of being quite harsh on themselves through the specs of Islam. So I think in those moments, I do sort of let them know that, okay, is this something you'll be interested in? If I sort of bring that in, and usually it does bring quite a bit of value to the therapeutic relationship and the process.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm thinking then about the difference then between clients that are coming specifically with the understanding of I'm coming because I want Islamic counselling versus clients who are perhaps coming with a particular issue, and in the assessment you're able to ascertain yourself that maybe Islamic counselling is suitable to work with the issues that they're bringing.
Yeah.
And then I'm curious as well then, because through my experience there are a lot of Muslim clients that say, oh, well, I'm looking for Islamic counselling. And very often when I then ask them a few more questions in the assessment, what I'm actually noticing is that what they actually want is a Muslim counsellor. So I'm wondering whether that's something that you experience. Is that something that you notice that actually are you finding that there are lots of Muslim clients that want a Muslim counsellor, and that being different to Muslim clients wanting a Islamic counselling?
Yeah, I think that I do find that as well because I think just having that similarity there, or even it being me being South Asian or being, of a similar culture, I feel like that does attract the clients. I feel like it's that hope that I will have that understanding. They don't have to sort of explain themselves or explain the culture or the religion, and they're able to sort of just be in the session and me being on the other side and sort of understanding exactly where they're coming from. And I think that is quite important for a lot of the clients.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking then again for viewers watching this, potential clients watching this, if they're Muslim, is to perhaps help invite them to think about what is it that they're actually wanting? Is it that they're wanting a Muslim counsellor, or is it that they're actually specifically looking for Islamic counselling based on how you've just described it, which is working with the soul and working with those different levels of nafs? So it feels like it's a really good distinction to make.
Yeah, I think initially it does come in with me being a Muslim counselor. I think as we get into the work, the Islamic counseling tends to just come in, and I feel like it is at a point where they're quite open to it, and they do want to sort of look at where they're at when it comes to the, that sort of modality as well. And I think that really I think it comes out quite beautifully. And I think it's sort of it comes at a time where the client is sort of ready for it. And I think that in itself is quite amazing.
Yeah, it kind of unfolds naturally, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in being able to kind of work across all that kind of huge age range spectrum, and then also being able to work and offer Islamic counselling, are there any kind of specialist issues or topics then that you either choose to work in or you find yourself working in because of the type of clients that you get?
Yeah. I feel like I find myself working a lot with self-esteem
Mm-hmm.
and self-image. I think especially when it comes to my South Asian clients, my Muslim clients, there is this work that comes up quite often, and that is working with getting to know them, placing themselves first. And I think even as Islamic counseling, it is that you put yourself and Allah first, and you sort of work towards getting to know you. You still have um that importance of putting your needs there, because and I feel like I've come up with this. So this is something I say quite a bit. I always say, in order to be selfless, you need to be selfish. And it goes back to the analogy of, you can't give from an empty cup. And I think a lot of just going through that, I find myself using that phrase and using um, that sort of idea quite a bit with my clients that I work with.
Yeah. And I'm really curious then that when you say that you find yourself then working with that topic of like self-esteem issues, and then within that specifically with kind of South Asian women as the client group, then why do you think that is? Like, I'm curious to know, like, what's going on in our communities then within that community that means that tends to be the common issue that's been brought to therapy.
I feel like, I think from my own experiences, what I've witnessed growing up as well within our community, I think there is a thing of putting others before yourself, and taking care of others is quite important, and being hospitable is quite important. But I think at some point along the line, we tend to put ourselves at the back. We sort of start putting ourselves into the background, and I think that's when the self-esteem issues sort of arise, or when there's those conditions of worth growing up. I think a lot of the times that can have a big impact on how much we put ourselves first, or how much we value ourselves and give ourselves that importance. I think that's where sometimes the issues come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you just mentioned that phrase there, conditions of worth. Could
Mm.
you just say a little bit more about what you mean by that, or perhaps give examples of where you've noticed what those conditions of worth are?
Yeah, I feel like growing up, I think in the culture as well, there is this thing about the less you sort of perhaps express yourself, or the less you sort of talk, even as a child, the more sort of value you might have. So it's an example would be, okay, if you behave good by being polite and behaving well, then you are good. And that's the sort of message that gives is, if you be good and you behave well, in a way almost suppress yourself, then I love you and accept you. And if you don't, then you are not accepted and loved. And I think that is something which can then be internalized and then carry on throughout adulthood as well. And it does, I think that's where the self-esteem issues arise, or that incongruence arises, because you do want to express yourself, you do want to put kind of put your needs forward, but then there's a part of you that fears that, okay, well, if I do, then I'm not good enough, or I'm bad, or I won't be loved, I won't be accepted. And I think that can be quite difficult to go through as an adult as well.
Yeah, incredibly challenging and painful. So, absolutely kind of conditions of worth. So, your worthiness and your value is based on whether you fulfill those conditions. And then alongside that, I'm then thinking about also this idea about conditional love, then as well, that somebody then who grows up in that environment is going to believe that I can only be loved and be lovable and to feel love if dot dot dot, if I meet these particular conditions or criteria. And as you said, if I behave well, if I'm a good girl or good boy, or if I tick certain boxes, perhaps only then am I worthy of receiving love, or only then am I actually lovable, which obviously leaks into and influences then low self-esteem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you find that this is a common issue that you're working with your client group.
Yeah, I find myself that kind of going across the board. And, you know, I find a lot of it is sort of related back to childhood and what kind of comes about. A lot of parental relationships or even the sort of authority figures they've faced growing up. And sometimes it is teachers and sometimes it is parents. And I feel like growing up, having authority figures and the relationship that you sort of share with them, it can have quite an impact with how you sort of relate to others, or, you know, your patterns of relating when it comes to adulthood and the sort of relationships you form with people around you. And I think it can even just be like, you know, when you do face authority figures growing up or as an adult, it influences how you feel about them, or, you know, perhaps with some people they sort of feel nervous or they feel, you know, um almost that fear of being told off. And I think that's where sometimes the imposter syndrome comes through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So based on this is kind of a specialist area that you work with, I'm if we kind of focus in on that a little bit more as well, I'm curious then about two areas of this. One is, so what is then in a client then coming to you to work on self-esteem? What is it then that you're doing in therapy? Like, how are you helping them then to boost their self-esteem, first of all? And second of all, and maybe it's a slightly cheeky question, but in a nutshell, what is it you actually would love to be able to say to those clients? What is the kind of a lesson, a life lesson maybe, or a life hack, or a, you know, even maybe a kind of motivational or inspirational thing that you want to say to them? Like, what is it that you would actually love to say to these women that in them coming, in order to boost their self-esteem, in order for them to feel better about themselves, what would you ultimately want them to know or to hear from you?
Mm. So to answer your first question, I think with the sort of things that I do, I think the first thing is getting them to sort of know themselves, like you are outside of these people who have sort of given you their opinion of you or what they think is best for you. Who are you? And I think the first step to a lot of things is self-awareness. So it's just bringing them awareness about themselves. And, you know, when they are sort of talking about themselves, whether that's in a negative way or whether they're talking about negative opinions, it's looking at, okay, where's the evidence for this? Where's the evidence for that you are this way, or, you know, this is how they feel about you, you know, that anxiety about how they're perceived. It's almost like, okay, what makes you feel that way? What is it that's indicating that? And a lot of the time there isn't much evidence. It's more of, you know, thoughts. So it is getting to know themselves, what they even like about themselves, what is, you know, what are their strengths, what's something that they want to work on. And I think that in itself, it kind of shifts the narrative, it shifts the script, start looking internally rather than externally. And it's almost, you know, giving themselves that space to spend time with themselves. And I think that's the beautiful thing about therapy, counseling. It's that one space that you can be you, you can talk about you. You know, a lot of the times what I do is I bring a bit of immediacy. So when I notice that they sort of being hard on themselves or they being quite critical, and sometimes they're being rude to themselves as well. And I think that's when I do bring it into the session and I sort of communicate that I felt quite sad seeing that, or seeing them talking to themselves that way. And I think having that sort of interaction and that sort of communication, I think it is quite helpful when it comes to self-esteem. Um, I do tend to give some worksheets as well around self-esteem and self-image. And I think all of them sort of inform themselves about them. It's time for them to go away and actually think about them. And I think that in itself is powerful, where they get to think about, okay, what do I like? What is it that I want? You know, what do I find difficult? And I think just bringing the I in, I think it's quite important.
Yeah.
And to answer your second question in terms of what I would like to say, I think it's something that I think I've probably needed that reminder as well. And I think it's so important to know that would be what other people think of you. It's an opinion, it's not facts. So ultimately you choose what opinion you can have of yourself. And I think that's the most important opinion as well. And I think that's really special. And I'm a very, with self-esteem, to going back to the question one, I think introduction to boundaries is really powerful as well. Just knowing, I know sometimes it's painful, but boundaries is you taking care of your future self. It's a way of you giving yourself that respect and dignity, which ties in with Islamic counselling because it's Islamically as well, and a part of having a part of that divine self is giving yourself that respect, giving yourself that dignity, because you are part of creation. Allah loves you. He has that respect, so it's almost like you need to respect yourself as well and love yourself, and that does come with putting boundaries and sometimes saying no, sometimes saying yes. Just choosing ultimately when you want to do that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of we need to be so mindful of what it is we're taking in from other people. And in the same way, I suppose that we are mindful of what we take in terms of food and drink, and how much we consume of something and what things are like halal or haram. In the same way, it's what we're taking on board and what we're taking in emotionally and mentally from other people. And yeah, absolutely, like drawing that boundary of what's good for me to take in, and equally what's not going to be helpful or healthy for me to take in. And that might well be other people's opinions of me. So I love that idea of, yeah, we get to decide for ourselves what it is we want to take on board that other people are offering us. Just because people offer an opinion, we don't have to take it and accept it as fact or truth or relevant about us. As you said, an opinion is it's just somebody else's thought.
Yeah, and I think even that, we've taken in facts, it's almost like, yes, people can give you feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It's not almost like you reject it. It's
No.
you get to take that space and be curious about the unknown. And it's take it, if someone does give you feedback, it's almost like learning about yourself. Well, is there evidence for this feedback? Can I sort of see it? And going forward with it in a more objective, curious manner. And I think that is one of the things I do say, which is, be curious about the unknown, because within the unknown lies growth. And I think that's quite beautiful in itself.
Yeah, very powerful as well. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Okay.
It kind of then leads me on to kind of a final kind of two-parter question in a way then. You really talked about kind of the type of clients you work with and type of issues you work with. And in this entire series, I've kind of asked all the other therapists and counsellors as well then to round off our conversation. What advice would you give? So, first of all, what advice would you give then to anybody who perhaps is thinking about becoming a therapist or counsellor themselves, or anyone that's currently training, perhaps, based on your experience, based on hindsight and your experience of training? What would you say to somebody that wants to train or is currently training as a counsellor?
Okay, so I might say a few things. Looking back at my experience, I think one of them would be that um, start looking for placement early. I think that in itself gives you that structure and it gives you that opportunity to kind of look at how the work goes hand in hand. There's less pressure as well, because I know I looked at it a little bit late, and mine was during COVID times as well. So I know that it did bring in that pressure and it was a bit difficult. So I think that's something I would definitely say, is that, start looking for placement early. I would also say that try to sort of organize your time and gift yourself that opportunity to sort of, you know, do the work, do the learning in a way where you're not feeling that pressure or you're not feeling, overwhelmed. And when you do go into placement, and when you do feel a certain way, this is like my third advice. So, when you do feel a certain way around clients, I think that can be quite informative. And I think this is something I learned quite later on. or, you know, after my placement, but, you know, how you feel within the counselling room is quite informative about the client and what might be going on for the client. And I think it can be safely sort of brought in with the client. So I think, or even if it's not, I think just knowing that it's coming from somewhere, it's very important to sort of either take that to supervision or bring it into the room if you feel comfortable enough to do that. So yeah, I think that would be my 3 tips.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then my part 2 follow-up to that question then would be, so you've given us some really helpful tips for trainees. What about for clients? What would you want, what advice or, again, hints or tips would you want to give to clients that perhaps are looking to enter or start therapy for themselves?
Yeah. So what I would say, I think it's going back to what I said before as well. One of them would definitely be delve into the unknown. And I think that's where the growth lies. So it's almost like sit. I know sometimes it will be uncomfortable and there will be some discomfort there, but sitting with that discomfort is quite powerful in itself. And another one would be try to be honest with your therapist. You know, if you feel like there's something blocking you from doing that, I think you can communicate that across. It's a safe place for you to be like, I just don't feel a bit comfortable right now. And I think your therapist would be comfortable exploring that with you. It's just bringing that congruence within as well.
Yeah.
So they're not there to judge you. They're not there to, you know, offer their opinions or what they think is best for you. It's literally just they're trying to sort of help you, help yourself. So I think the analogy I like to give when it comes to counselling is it's almost like you're lost in the woods. The counsellor or the therapist holds the torch and gives you the tools that you might need in order for you to find your way out. Mm-hmm. I think that's something to think about.
Again, a wonderful set of advice there then for clients as well as for trainees. Thank you so much, Humera, for joining me today for today's episode of Therapist Talk. And to everybody watching, thank you for joining us as well. And I look forward to all of you joining me for the next episode of Therapist Talk. Bye for now.